A very good morning to you. Thank you for making time to join us here on KBC Channel 1. This is BizCheck, and we shall be having quite some conversations for the next 2 hours. My name is Betty Kiptum. Now, we want to start our program with a conversation on matters infrastructure in Africa, and we'll be touching a bit on Kenya as well. And to have this conversation is Sylvester Kasuku. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Africa Center for Transport and Infrastructure. Welcome on set.
Thank you very much, Betty.
Right. Let's just start with an overview of how infrastructure development is doing in Africa, kindly.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, you can remember that over the last week we completed what is called the PIDA Week. That is Program for Infrastructure Development for Africa, which is under the African Union and is supported by a number of development partners. Among them is the African Development Bank. It's also supported by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, among a host of other institutions. But first of all, it is important to understand what is the whole story about PIDA,
right,
or what are we talking about when we are talking about PIDA?
And do tell.
So Program for Infrastructure Development for Africa encompasses a program that has been developed by African leaders under the African Union. And this was done around 2012, in which it was recognized that unless we develop requisite infrastructure for the continent, we will not be able to industrialize, and we will not be able to integrate Africa, and we will not be able to strengthen intra-African trade, and we will not be able to allow for what you call cross-border labor mobility, as well as many other aspects of development that we are looking for in the continent. And this came, at the backdrop of what was seen over the last 3 industrial revolutions, in which the African continent was registered as having not industrialized, for a number of reasons. Key among them is the infrastructure deficit. And going forward, it has been noted that the African continent is actually having a backlog of infrastructure development. And this goes beyond a tune of over $180 billion per year. And what we can say is that now, therefore, under the African Union, a program was put together that is guiding the process of infrastructure development in Africa up to the year 2040. The timeline being that we cannot wait beyond the year 2040 for us to reach a timeline of 2063, which is called the AU Agenda 2063, upon which we ought to have resolved many, or if not all, of our development problems. So on the road sector, the drive is to develop over 37,000 kilometers of new railway in the African continent. And you've seen the race towards the development of road infrastructure even in Kenya.
Yes.
The other bit is to develop about 32,000 kilometers of new railway in Africa by the year 2040. We are also supposed to develop an added capacity for ports to the tune of 1.3 billion tons by the year 2040. So when I'm saying 1.3 billion, I'm not saying 1.3 million. 1.3 billion ton added capacity.
Those are very big numbers, and yes, quite some. Your outlook for the future is very big. So how are we doing this far? We are already in 2022, around 18 years to go to 2040,
right, and
we know that infrastructure projects take time to deliver. So how are we doing so far?
Yes, encompassing all this is equally a budget of about $360 billion that the continent has budgeted under PIDA for the development of these projects. It first began with the prioritization of key infrastructure networks, as well as infrastructure platforms, ranging from roads, railways, ports, airports, electricity. And that's why you see, even within the Eastern Africa region, we are talking about, cross-border connections. You find Kenya getting power from Ethiopia, Kenya getting power from Uganda, Rwanda getting power from the rest of the other countries, South Sudan looking towards getting power from other countries. So this particular framework is enabling us to pool resources, to share resources, therefore, with the need or with the goal of actually achieving the results. So number one is that the prioritization was done. And under what is called PIDA project preparatory process, one, was completed, and a number of countries did get support in terms of preparing their projects. And during the meeting that we had over the last week, was that found out that unless we prepare projects, we cannot be able to implement them. You have to prepare projects to get them ready for implementation, and at the same time considering that among the goals to be achieved in this particular PIDA process is also to bring private sector on board.
Yes.
In terms of infrastructure investments, at the same time in terms of financing. Sometimes the government might not be having all the money, but might be looking forward to other financing instruments. And this is already happening. A number of projects are already being implemented in the continent. And as such, we believe that we are well on track. And the review that was now done under PIDA PAP 2, project appraisal process 2, for financing preparatory processes for projects, as well as getting financing for the implementation processes, has shown that there is good progress.
African countries have taken to implementing some very huge projects, Kenya included, and you've mentioned the issue of financing. Many African governments have had issues with budgetary constraints, as you've mentioned. So far, where are we accessing the extra funding that we need for these infrastructure projects? And a very important question, are we borrowing safely, so to say?
What I would like to say is that number one, financing is not confined to borrowing alone. There is financing that can be done in-house, in that you collect your revenue and you pay your bills.
Yes.
That is under budgeted frameworks. There is also the part that you also budget, but with borrowing. And you can borrow from local banks or local financial institutions. You can borrow from development partners, or you can borrow from other international lenders in the market. You can do bonds. You can do all manner of arrangements. There are quite an array of them. You can equally invite private sector to come and invest in a project that you have prepared as a government, provided that it has what you can call a rate of return that is attractive to an investor. Because investors don't invest as social, social ventures, but they invest for returns. And I would like to say that so far, we are not, I wouldn't want to go into the debate of borrowing, whether we are borrowing safely or not. But any lender around the globe always give the conditions that are you going to be able to pay? And there is always a way in which that is measured. They look at, in terms of your revenues that are associated with the investment that you are undertaking, or other support mechanisms to enable you to pay. And these have always been evaluated and have always been found to be meeting the market demands. And as such, under those conditions, is therefore do provide for a mechanism for the country to borrow. But going forward, I would like to say that financing is not just being based on borrowing alone. We've seen a lot of countries now across Africa actually going for private sector investments. The countries prepare projects, then they undertake transaction advisory processes that enable private sector to compete favorably. So that, again, you do not have a private sector that is coming on board without competition or without appropriate understanding of the value for money. Then you end up losing as a country. So the processes that are understood and that are operational in the market are allowing us, therefore, to be able to evaluate the appropriate value for money from all types of investors. And this is taking place across the continent. It is not just an issue on the Eastern Africa side, but even if you go to the west coast of Africa, all the way to the north, many countries are undertaking projects together with private sector arrangements.
Africa is one of the, if it's not the most, the fastest growing region in the world globally. Yeah? So, attracting global investors, to invest in our infrastructure, what does it take, and are we packaging ourselves right?
I would like to say that we are packaging ourselves right. Number one, as a country, Number two, you do realize that countries have the regional economic blocks, and we are equally undertaking packaging and preparatory processes that give confidence to investors around our region. We are equally undertaking processes supported by continental institutions like the African Union, supported by the NEPAD, and the AU Commission, to be able to prepare a number of these projects. And we are also supported by the African Development Bank, which is the continental financier, also to buttress a number of preparatory processes. So I would like to say that, in a nutshell, we are well prepared as an investment platform. And the ongoing processes, I would like to say that right from the year 2012, 2013, the number of projects that have been financed by private sector are quite enormous. And we even still have other ventures currently ongoing in the continent, transactions taking place. Others have taken place and they are operational. Like if you look at even in the 6 ports of Nigeria, whether you are talking about the ports that have been leading, all of them, in fact, all the 6 ports have a Papa port, name it. They all have private sector investors. You go to Alexandria port in Egypt, there are current investors, and not just from one country, including China, Europe, name it, America. You can talk about the Middle East investors, the Japanese investors. You go to the port of Maputo, you find a mix of a number of investors from the Chinese to Europe. You go to you go to the port of Walvis Bay, you find an array of investors. You go to Tema Port in Ghana, you find an array of investors. You go to the port, Tangier Port in Morocco, it's one of the new ports in the continent, and you find an array of investors, including other added investment opportunities like industrial parks, special economic zones, among many others. Yes.
So when we talk about now, the private investors are doing their bit, as you said. There's the role of the governments now, the governments in place, and the political environment in African countries has to play a role in the implementation of these projects. So what is the role of the governments, and how are we doing on that bit?
I would like to say that no private sector can be willing to invest in a country if the government is not providing the right environment. And in every infrastructure project that is being prepared for private sector, there is always a risk analysis that is undertaken. Among them, or key among them, is the issue of analyzing the political risk event. That is the country ready politically, through its structures of governance, through its leadership, through its policies, through its regulations and laws, is it able to sustain and to support a private sector investor from inception to recovery of resources that have been invested and to continue the business?
By the National Assembly.
In the continent,
we recommend the Honorable Wandai and his team.
The countries are having
next to him is the Honorable.
They have appropriate policies in place, they have appropriate regulations in place, and they equally strive to undertake what we call a business competitiveness enhancement program. You've been hearing about what was called ease of doing business. Now, we've moved from ease of doing business to what we call now competitiveness. So in terms of improving competitiveness, you therefore reduce those particular elements that can actually lower a private investor's appetite for investments in the country. For example, Kenya, we have the PPP law that allows for a private sector investor to come and invest. We have even the Privatization Commission that allows does the investment of projects from the government portfolio to private sector portfolio. We have a number of regulations that also support private sector investments, including incentives that have been put to attract private sector investors.
Right. these are for projects that are maybe in a certain country. How about now for projects that span a whole region, you know, like the LAPSET, which goes across a number of countries? How is that handled?
Yes, we do have a number of these projects across the continent. And you heard about the Trans-African highways, you know, that have already been, you hear about the north-south, the east to west, like the LAPSET connects the east coast with the west coast. You have the West African corridor that also comes all the way from the Abidjan, all the way from Lagos, Abidjan, connecting all the way to you know, the port of Dakar, and also to the port of Tangier, and going all the way to Alexandria. All these corridors traverse a number of countries. First of all, we are facilitated under the African Union. You will recall that in the year 2015, the LAPSET Corridor Program was admitted as a Presidential Infrastructure Championship Initiative project under the African Union. So far, there are about 10 of those kind of projects in the whole continent. They are just 10. And they are key to the, the integration of the continent. And as such, they are facilitated from that particular platform. And what I mentioned at the project appraisal process under PEDA does allow countries to come together and get support to prepare the projects, as well as to finance the projects. So you find that a project that is coming from Kenya, the Kenyan side, going into the Ethiopian side, and I want to give you a very good example. The Isiolo, Moyale, Hawassa, Addis Ababa Road was financed through a syndication framework by the African Development Bank. It was straddling across the corridors, across the two countries. And it's more or less now completed. Kenya already completed their 500 kilometers, and Ethiopia is at the final stages of completing their 500 kilometers. It allowed the two countries, therefore, to have a bilateral arrangement. So what usually brings the countries together to engage is that bilateral instruments are therefore signed between the countries, agreeing to cooperate in the process of planning, development, and operations of the particular infrastructure project. And you equally heard about the pipeline project that is supposed to come from South Sudan. You did see that there was a bilateral agreement that was being negotiated with the government of South Sudan. You've equally seen Kenya sign bilateral agreements on issues of energy and oil and gas to enable Kenya and Ethiopia to develop and operate energy. What you call electricity transmission lines, tapping energy from the side of Ethiopia. And the same is happening to a number of countries. You have heard about the Inga project, the Inga Dam, which has been lingering on the continent's development table for quite a long time. At the moment, you see that it is coming to the table for transactions. It's equally moving into implementation. And the energy will not be consumed by Congo alone, but will actually be transmitted to many other countries in the region. As such, we are again brought together under what is usually also called the regional economic communities, like the East African community. You have projects which also come under COMESA. Like if we are sharing a particular infrastructure project with a country that is not within the East African community, then we look for one of the regional economic communities arrangements, like IGAD, COMESA, and the others, so that whichever country you therefore share one of those arrangements with, then and you intend to undertake a project, is therefore brought into that particular framework for cooperation. So the continental arrangements or the institutional arrangements that we have in the continent is number one. Number two is the country's ability to be able to commit themselves at bilateral levels, even trilateral levels, to cooperate in the development, in the planning and the development of the infrastructure projects is equally another thing. And then we have the development partner frameworks, such that when they are financing a particular project that is cross-border, they therefore have instruments that support that, like under the African Development Bank or even under the World Bank. They have what we call, cross-border project, frameworks, such that if you are looking for financing for a project that straddles one or two countries or more, two or more countries, you therefore have access to a particular and a specialized financing instrument that therefore allows you to seek for that particular support. Yeah.
I think those are some of the projects that you've mentioned that are doing really well, you know, in terms of implementation. According to the NEPAD website, infrastructure development in Africa, the implementation is about 19%, while for health projects, it's about 74%. That means infrastructure has a long way to go.
Correct.
So what are some of these challenges that that sector is facing, and how can we surmount them?
Yes, during the last meeting that we had a few days ago here, and this was the first time when the PEDA week was brought to East Africa, specifically to Kenya, we did see that, number one, preparatory processes for projects are actually a challenge to a number of countries. We are equally aware that a number of countries in the continent might also not be very stable politically, and you know, so that has also been affecting some of the key infrastructure projects. The other bit is that whereas a project might be prepared for a government financing arrangement, but now when you want to move it to private sector financing or implementation arrangements, you therefore need to satisfy a number of private sector appetite elements for investment. And it was equally found that many countries do not have that capacity or the readiness to have the projects that they've already listed as priority projects to be ready for private sector uptake. And again, you did talk about issues of financing, particularly from borrowing. Countries are also limited with regard to how they can borrow. So again, if your borrowing is not allowing you to go a step further, to get more resources to be able to implement your project, then you also find that you still get stuck. But I would like to say that most of the large-scale projects that are cross-border actually have longer gestation period due to processes that are required for their preparatory, preparatory processes, as well as financing readiness. Yeah.
And for the financing bit that you've mentioned, project delays, at least as far as Kenya goes, are very rampant, you know. And how exactly can the African continent deal with this issue of project delays?
Of course, project delays are caused by a number of factors.
Okay.
Number one, if it is fully government funded, maybe it might be that the government is not raising enough resources. Number two, if it is for private sector, it might be that the private sector are not comfortable with the instruments that are supposed to be providing for comfort. I want to give you examples. When the government wanted to implement the expressway by around 2010, 2009, 2010, 2011, it was actually ready for signing of the contract. But the development partners involved said, let's take a step back because of a few issues which they thought they were not comfortable with, particularly with the people who are supposed to be implementing it, because it was supposed to be implemented by private sector. And at the same, actually, it's now even being implemented by private sector. So it's not a government borrowing. So you see, like, that's a practical example that actually delayed the project from all the way from 2010 up to 2020, 21, 22. The other bit you've seen, we actually also having private sector implementing the highway from Nairobi, Nakuru to Mau Summit, and preparing a project for it to reach that level of implementation requires a lot of issues, particularly when private sector is involved. So every step has to be approved by the financiers. Every step has to receive the necessary instruments of support from government. So putting all this together is usually not very easy.
Okay.
Yeah, particularly for large-scale projects. So it is an issue of processes. And I think as we continue to go forward, the countries are getting more efficient. There is greater confidence that is now growing within the continent previously there wasn't enough confidence, but now that there are projects that have been undertaken by private sector around the continent, and they seem to be gaining traction with regard to creating an environment for business, then private sector is starting to get that confidence.
All right.
Yeah.
We are having this conversation about infrastructure development in Africa and just what is ailing infrastructure development and also what is happening and what is good about it currently. We're having this conversation with Sylvester Kasuku, the CEO of Africa Center for Transport and Infrastructure. We want to take a quick break. When we come back, this conversation continues. Stay with us.
Already.
Here on KBC Channel 1. Remember, today is World Kidney Day, and of course looking at just the challenges that people with kidney problems are facing, as well as the renal problems. And of course the Minister of Health, Kagwe, will be giving us a speech much later on. Purity Museo is on that bit, and we shall be expecting something from her. We also have the Law Society of Kenya having its elections at the Supreme Court grounds. Ben Troy will be updating us on what is going on there. We shall be giving you that report in a little bit, but here in studio we are having a conversation about infrastructure development in Africa, and now we want to shift gears a bit to the Kenyan bit of the infrastructure. Sylvester Kasuku is my guest, and he's the Chief Executive Officer of Africa Center for Transport and Infrastructure. Thank you for staying with us.
Thank you.
Let us talk about how Kenya is benefiting from the PIDA initiatives, please.
Yes, I would like to say that Kenya is benefiting from these initiatives in many ways. Number one, owing to the nature or the number of projects that are found within the Kenyan space, or projects that are emanating from the Kenyan space, connecting to other jurisdictions, as well as the role of Kenya within the AU framework with regards to championing leadership of project implementation. Number one, as I did say, that the LAPSSET corridor program is one of the 10 what do you call the PICI, that is the Presidential Infrastructure Championship Initiative under AU, and the chairman of that particular committee, or the champion for that particular committee, is none other than our President Uhuru Kenyatta, who is actually the champion of the LAPSSET corridor program under AU. And because it straddles many other countries, he therefore takes leadership in terms of seeing how best the project is implemented across the continent.
Okay, allow me to cut you short there a little bit. You shall continue with your point in just a bit. We want to take you to the Milimani Law Courts, where the LSK elections press briefing is going on. Dunstan Omari is currently speaking. Let's just listen into that.
Yes.
You're doing a commentary about today's elections?
Yes.
You're an aspirant, right?
Yes.
Yes. Go ahead. Okay. Just in the
Yes.
Dunstan Omari there, just standing by. I think he'll be speaking in a little bit about the Law Society of Kenya elections. Ben Troy is keeping an eye on that and will be updating us as we go on. We are here in studio talking about infrastructure development, and Sylvester Kasuku, the CEO of the Africa Center for Transport and Infrastructure, was telling us about how Kenya is benefiting from the PIDA initiatives. Please go on.
Thank you very much. And so Kenya, being at the helm of the leadership of preparing and implementing these key projects in the continent, does give Kenya that particular, position of advantage with regard to receiving attention for the projects that it has, and also directing on how other countries that are connected to these projects can also come in and to support the development of the projects through their territories. I want to say that we know that the African continent is quite disadvantaged in terms of infrastructure. And the infrastructure deficit is actually costing the continent about 2% of its GDP. That's a loss per year. And it equally makes Africa not trade with itself. So the more we are implementing these projects, the more we are allowing Africa to trade. And as such, Kenya therefore becomes a prime location for promoting business within the continent. You know that a number of multinationals are also headquartered in Kenya. And as they expand their businesses, and as Kenyans continue to look for more businesses, then the expansion of these projects lead to the creation of more markets, or be a bigger market for businesses in Kenya. So that's number one. Number two is that with regard to funding of projects, and I did say that there are frameworks that deal with projects that are that go beyond the country's boundary. And as such, the financing instruments that are therefore deployed to support these projects are therefore also accessed by Kenya. Like Kenya is was supported under PIDAPAP 1 and is also being supported under PIDAPAP 2 with regard to these cross-border projects. Like you'll find the railway that is under LAPSET, the highways, the pipelines, among other projects, are actually being prepared under PIDAPAP 2 in terms of design as well as in terms of financing for implementation. So that gives Kenya that advantageous position. The other bit is that there are many corridors that are actually emanating from Kenya. You have the north-south that crosses through Kenya. Then you have the LAPSET crossing through Kenya. Then you have the other corridor that goes all the way to, through Uganda, Congo, also going towards the western part of the continent. All these projects are key to Kenya's development. Then you also have the corridor that also comes from Turkana running through Isebania, and the other one also running through Namanga. All these are key corridors that are supporting the continent in terms of regional integration. And as such, the regional integration being top on the agenda, Kenya's infrastructural bit, therefore, becomes a continental agenda, becomes a continental priority beyond the national priority that they are.
All right. We'll continue with this conversation in a little bit. Now we come back to our conversation with Sylvester Kasuku, the CEO of Africa Center for Transport and Infrastructure Development. We are talking about Kenya benefiting from infrastructure development projects in the continent. And Kenya being the strongest economy in the Eastern Africa region, how does that position us to take advantage of these projects?
Number one, it is that our position in the region is that we are a hub, and to continue to be the hub, we must also strengthen our position with regard to attracting investors to come into the country, and also being able to fast track the implementation of these key projects. Then how, therefore, does this go? We know that we've put in place a number of laws. And one of the most progressive constitutions around the continent is the Kenyan constitution that actually, supports private sector investment. We also have policies that are very progressive, investment policies that also protect private investment interests in the country. We have our institutions of government, like the judiciary, that also is very strong with regard to protecting the private sector investors' interest. And what I mean by private sector interest in areas where government has a greater influence is that is not just private sector from outside the country, but even private sector within the country. Because should you need to have your investment safe, then you therefore need to look at institutions that will support your position, that will protect you. And this really is well enshrined within our policies, regulations, and laws. The other bit is that We are, therefore, as we continue to implement the projects, the benefit therefore come with a multiplier effect. For example, the Lamu port that is being constructed, although it is more or less through now with the first 3 berths, and the road infrastructure that is being constructed to connect it to the already existing network to Ethiopia and South Sudan, does provide a platform for private sector and private investors in Kenya and private Kenyan businesses to take advantage of the new investment platform that has been created, and therefore also to partner with other investors from other parts of the globe. Yes, rather than being importers of goods, we can now also move to the next stage of being producers of goods locally, and then to look for the market for the same goods that are produced here outside from outside the country. So what I would like to say is that there's a great deal of benefit that this brings to the country. Jobs creation is good for the youth in this country, and in terms of reducing the level of unemployment in the country. And you know that about over 70% of all unemployed in the country are actually the youth. So the more jobs we create, the more we create more opportunities for the youth in Kenya. We also are driving towards a position of, let's say, goods that are made in Kenya. For a long time, we have been importing even things we can make in Kenya. But now, using the infrastructures that are now connecting us to new markets, moving into production of these goods that are consumed within the country and within the region, therefore also gives us the opportunity to be able to move into industrialization faster and to be able to grow the market, the market quantities in terms of where we need to take the goods that we produce in the country. And our target should not just be the local market alone, but we should look for markets outside the country as well.
Right.
Just like other countries where we import goods from have also captured our market.
Yes, that is very important. Most, or rather, infrastructure projects in the continent have been known to use the services of external contractors, or contractors from other countries, as opposed to local contractors. So how are these projects that we are implementing supporting the local market?
Yes, I would like to say that one of the problems that has always led to use of external contractors, or that is contractors that come from outside the continent, has actually been what I would like to say as a lack of capacity to handle large-scale infrastructure projects. Otherwise, if there was that large-scale capacity, then maybe local contractors would be handling. But the local contractors are not completely excluded. Sometimes lender rules, and I want us to take this seriously. Lender rules, people that are lending you money, also have conditions. That we give you money, we also need to see contractors from our country or from our region also benefiting. Like if you get money from Europe, from a European lenders, they'll most likely tell you to get, at least some of their contractors also to participate. But that doesn't preclude Kenyans from participating. And that's why you always see that local content being counted as part of the contract. The big guy gets the contract for purposes of large-scale mobilization and delivery and quality assurance, but our local contractors are also therefore subcontracted to deliver the same job. So as they continue to partner with these external contractors that come with certain lender regulations or lender demands, then you also find that our local contractors also continue to grow their capacity to deliver. And I think you can nowadays see many contractors, which are Kenyan contractors, participating in a number of infrastructure projects. So it's not just the guys or the big companies from outside the country that you see listed there at the top, but go below it and look at the array of contractors. Whether you're talking about civil works, whether you're talking about people doing electricals, whether you're talking about people doing mechanical, whether you name it, suppliers of materials. Materials are sourced from the local environment. Save for a situation whereby you might not find that material locally.
So you're saying the local people are not excluded?
The local people are not excluded. All the way from the supply of materials or inputs into the contracts, to jobs that are created, to contracts that are subcontracted, and also to skills that continue to be upgraded. Yes.
So at what point will we see the big guy being a local contractor?
We might not put a specific time scale on when the Kenyans can be seen to be the big contractors, but it's already happening. Yes, it's already happening.
All right.
A number of, like if you look at construction of buildings in town, you will find that a number of contractors are actually local, undertaking those construction works.
All right.
Yeah. Look at a number of roads that are being constructed in the rural areas now, or even some of the roads that are connecting major areas of the country. You find that local contractors are now undertaking those construction works. Yes.
All right. Let's talk about the digitization and maybe leveraging on the digitization that is very well developed in Africa, especially Kenya, you know, in helping the infrastructure development grow. How are we leveraging on that?
Yes, during the last PEDA meeting, which ended a few days ago, did show that digitalization in the continent is actually one of the major inputs towards integration of the continent. Whereas physical infrastructure might not allow us to be moving across borders. Like today, if somebody told you to drive to Ghana, you'd wonder where to pass, or that you drive to Namibia. You'd start wondering how to go there. So what I would like to say is that where physical infrastructure is posing a constraint, the digital infrastructure is actually becoming an enabler for regional integration. We can be able to transact across borders. I've seen banks like Equity Bank now having digital transactions across the continent. Like you can transact with people in Congo, you can transact with people in West Africa. While you are here in Nairobi, using the bank that you look at as a local bank. But again, what we are saying is that digitalization is actually also the digital economy is actually a new sector of the economy. And it is estimated by that by the year 2030, it could actually grow to 10% of GDP for African countries or for the continental economy. So that has also come in as a new input, as some sort of a shot in the arm for the African continent that has been lagging behind with regard to growth of physical infrastructure. Again, digitalization is enabling us to actually do more business within the continent with regard to enabling e-commerce. When we are able to actually, search for goods, undertake negotiations, and also procure goods and pay for the goods using digital platforms. This is actually going to enable us to do more trade within the continent.
All right.
And at the same time, the digital economy or digitalization is actually enabling our youth, the African youth, to be able to access opportunities beyond their own boundaries, or beyond their own physical boundaries.
Right.
Yes.
Which of course has come into play, especially during the COVID-19 period when movement was hindered,
Yes.
So as we come to a close of this conversation, what is your outlook for African infrastructure and in Kenya, to be specific, maybe for the next 5-10 years or so?
Yes, what I would like to say is that going forward, we have done impressive work so far with the big push infrastructure, and that doesn't mean that now we stop. We'll still continue. However, we need to move into the level of what we are calling deepening accessibility within the country. There are several parts of the country which are still finding it difficult to access markets, or you might find it difficult that even if there are goods or certain agricultural products being produced elsewhere, you might find it difficult to access them during certain seasons of the year. So what we need to do, therefore, is that within the country we should deepen accessibility to enable various regions to be able to produce whatever they are producing, to be able to reach markets, to be able to access inputs, to be able also to create more jobs and to be able to attract better technologies of production, and also to spread industrial development beyond the cities.
Very important.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Asante sana.
I have been speaking with Sylvester Kasuku, the CEO of Africa Center for Transport and Infrastructure, and we have been talking about infrastructure development in Africa as well as in Kenya, and just what that looks for the country and the continent in the near future. And of course, it's important to ensure accessibility to even the most remote areas, to ensure growth of the economy and eventually the improvement of living standards of African people.